You know how people always tell you that the first impression is everything? Well, that's not always true, especially in rock and roll. Take Alice in Chains for example. After the band had gotten signed to Sony in 1989, an artist relations rep who worked for the label sent the demo tape to producer David Jordan. Now, Jordan had just come off the huge success of producing Jane's Addiction's debut record, Nothing Shocking. Now, Seattle wasn't on the national radar yet when it came to the music scene, but for those from the area, they knew something was happening. And one of those bands showing a lot of promise was Alice in Chains, but no producers wanted anything to do with them. Their music was hard to pin down, and it was all over the place. And David Jordan would remember hearing the demo tape he was sent, saying, "I met with the band and told them what I thought, that their songs were a mess, but I also said to guitarist Jerry Cantrell that I liked what he was doing. It was like if Metallica had sped Tony Iommi's riffs up and then brought them back down again." It would be one song in particular that would catch Jordan's attention, saying, "I forget which song it was, but it was the closest thing to Alice in Chains we know now, with the drop D tuning." Soundgarden guitarist Kim Thayil would shed some more light on the sound of those early Alice in Chains demos, saying they owed a little bit more to Poison. Now, ironically, it would be Alice in Chains' peers who were credited with helping shape that now infamous sound of the band, with Kim Thayil going on to say, "Jerry asked me how to play songs like Beyond the Wheel from Soundgarden's 1988 debut record, Ultra Mega OK. And I said, there's this thing called drop D tuning." A short time later, they recorded a demo of the songs you hear on Facelift, and they had that drop D tuning on them, he concluded. Now, Jordan's initial impressions were correct because a year and a half after Facelift came out in August of 1990, Alice in Chains would surpass Soundgarden, Nirvana, and Pearl Jam to become the first real grunge superstars. Let's not forget that Facelift was the first record from the Seattle scene to sell 500,000 copies, and Alice in Chains helped introduce the world to the Seattle sound. But how did Alice in Chains first start? So guitarist Jerry Cantrell and singer Layne Staley would first meet 3 years prior in 1987. Layne had a strange musical past, fronting a glam metal band called Sleaze, while Jerry played in a band called Diamond Lie. But both musicians shared a lot of similarities. They were influenced by the same type of music and came from troubled backgrounds, as well as dabbled in drugs. And Cantrell would tell author Mark Yarm in the great book Everybody Loves This Town how he met Layne and his generosity towards him, saying, "We met at a party. I didn't have a place to live, so he invited me to this place where he lived called the Music Bank. He was just such a cool guy and his voice was amazing. I knew I wanted to be in a band with him right off the bat." Now, they would finally settle on the name Alice in Chains, which was derived from one of Layne's past band names, and the lineup would be cemented by bassist Mike Starr and drummer Sean Kinney. The group's demo, known as the Treehouse Tapes, came across Nick Terzo, who worked at A&R for Columbia Records, who signed the band. That demo would find its way to producer David Jordan, who suggested the group record some more songs. Soon afterwards, Jordan would get a demo of 6 new songs, and one of those songs was the massive hit Man in the Box. Now, that song struck a particular chord with Jordan, who traveled from LA to Seattle to begin work on their first record titled Facelift. As Jordan spent more time in Seattle, he started to notice that something was bubbling at the surface. The members of Alice in Chains would take the producer to different Seattle clubs where he saw local bands like Mother Love Bone and Soundgarden, and he would remember, "Yeah, you could tell something was in the air. I had kind of been aware of the Seattle sound that people were talking about, but to be there felt really exciting." Now, Facelift would be recorded in the middle of the wilderness outside of Seattle at the London Bridge Studios, and while singer Layne Staley's drug use wasn't as problematic as it would be in later years, the band was dealing with another problem. Drummer Sean Kinney had broken his hand and couldn't play. At one point, the band had Mother Love Bone drummer Greg Gilmore fill in, but he would soon leave as David Jordan was skeptical of the move even working. Kinney would remain on the drums for the recording of the album and would play with a broken hand. And while the band's 1992 record Dirt was surrounded by a lot of dark emotions and feelings, Jordan looked fondly at the recording sessions for Facelift, saying there was a real sense of family and friendship amongst the band members, revealing those guys came from the same sort of crazy backgrounds and they banded together like a family. I believe that Layne was a sensitive person attracted to darkness, but I never saw any evidence of drugs in the studio, not once. I believe that on Facelift, Layne was portraying a dark world from the outside looking in. It's only later that they were right inside it, looking out. Now, guitarist Jerry Cantrell would concur, telling Spin Magazine, "We're all outcasts. We just want to be able to look at each other in the eye and go, this is pretty cool. And that's all you need. Everybody's grooving on the same thing. Now, looking at the surface, songs like Man in the Box, We Die Young, and Bleed the Freak seem chock full of dark imagery, but a closer review of the lyrics paint a different picture. This wasn't a band that was singing about drugs or the rock and roll lifestyle in all their songs. Layne Staley would claim that Man in the Box was about censorship of the media, while We Die Young was inspired by a bus trip that Jerry Cantrell took on his way to rehearsals when he saw preteens with beepers running drug deals. And We Die Young would be the first single released from Facelift in July of 1990, with the album following a month later. Alice in Chains stood in their own category of rock, and no other band really sounded like them. Added on top was that they had these amazing harmonies that would only be taken to the next level with each subsequent release. And upon its release, Facelift wasn't a big success. The band had to tour for a long time for the record to finally make its mark. And the band would find themselves on the Clash of the Titans tour, which was one of the biggest heavy metal tours of the 90s. Featuring metal pioneers like Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax, Alice in Chains seemed a bit out of place. Now, originally they weren't even supposed to be on the tour. It was supposed to be thrash band Death Angel that was supposed to open for the three metal bands, but a tour bus crash would force them to bow out, allowing Alice in Chains to fill in. Scott Ian of Anthrax would remember the rude reception the band was met with initially, saying they were out in front of 15,000 Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth fans that were pelting them every night with crap, but they never let any of it get to them. And then of course Man in the Box broke, and all these people that were throwing beer cups at them went out and bought the record. So Alice, they got their revenge. Now, Man in the Box would be released as a single in the spring of 1991, with Jordan remembering how no rock radio stations wanted anything to do with the band because they didn't like Layne's voice. It's kind of ironic given that most modern rock stations nowadays play a lot of bands who imitate or basically rip off Layne's vocal style. And Jordan would recall, at first radio wouldn't touch it because they said Layne's voice was wrong. Many program directors said that. Because this is at the time of Axl Rose and Dio and all these high voices. I've always liked the little bluesy voice myself. To say that Layne's voice is wrong, or to say anybody's voice is wrong, is a pretty ridiculous thing to say, but that's the feedback I got. It was just a station in Texas that put it on syndication and the reaction was wild, so everyone followed suit. And he was correct, because MTV would follow suit and they would soon add Man in the Box to the rotation, and the song took off. Now by this point in time, Facelift had only sold about 40,000 copies. Within 6 weeks of Man in the Box hitting it big on rock radio and MTV, the album sold a whopping 400,000 copies. And the band followed the Clash of the Titans tour by supporting Van Halen, a tour that was met with some great pranks which I've covered in a separate video. As the promotional tour for Facelift ended, Jordan was once again working with Alice in Chains on their follow-up 1992's Dirt. But the band had changed and the mood around them was much darker. Jordan recalled seeing the band perform live before they started the Dirt session, saying, "I went to see them just before we went in to do Alice in Chains' second album, Dirt. I asked them, what's it like to be famous? And they all said, we hate it, especially Layne. He said people treat you like an object, they just want a piece of you." And Jordan would go on to say, something had happened to that family. It was drugs, that was obvious. Layne started recording a week after getting out of rehab, and they suddenly seemed to be living in the darkness that they were only exploring on songs like We Die Young from the first record. That's what they wanted, but you have to be careful for what you wish for, I guess. While Dirt is often held up as the pinnacle of Alice in Chains' career, it wouldn't have happened had it not been for Facelift, which I feel is often overlooked by the media and some fans of the band. So that concludes today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. And as always, if you want to support my channel, just simply watch another video or go check us out on Patreon. Take care.